Hey, Pathway, this is Pastor Brian, and I am hosting today our podcast, and so excited. This podcast is about digging deeper and building a bigger people in Christ. And so we do this every week, and we kind of rotate around topics and stories and even hosts and guests. So today I've got with me a couple of awesome people from our staff and team. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm James Flaming. No, I'm Randy Miller. I'm one of the pastors here at Pathway, and I mostly oversee worship and care for the congregational care, and it's just great to be here again. It's my second time around.
Let's go. And then we have a first timer who's almost always in the room, but the first time on the camera. So
yes, I am usually behind the scenes. So I am the one who is shooting and editing the podcast videos. My name is Kristy. And I have somehow been convinced to be on this side of the mic, but it's going to be fun, and I'm excited to be here this morning.
Yeah, I think all of you will appreciate her heart and see why, and we're just so thankful for how you make us shine around here. And speaking of that, we're talking a lot this month about light shine bright, this idea that Jesus is the light of the world and calls his people in church to be the light. And yesterday we dug into a Christmas story that really kind of sets up the coming Messiah, the coming light, and talked about the idea of being life-giving. And in particular, kind of the hook statement was hiding is not life-giving, but finding and being found is life-giving. And I think there's something in that in the story we looked at. So I think how we'll start today, I'll just kind of recap the story and then just see kind of, before we get into some of the other topics, just kind of for you guys, what stood out to you. And so yesterday we just looked at this text that Mary and Elizabeth had both received the announcement that there would child. Elizabeth is of advanced age, we'll say that, and had been barren, and she's going to have John the Baptizer. Mary is younger. She's a virgin. She has the Messiah. And Mary makes the trek for 4 days, we think, walks all the way to be with Elizabeth. And as she comes into the room, the baby inside of John leaps because there's life in the room and the Messiah is there. And so from there, Elizabeth prophesies over Mary, and Mary worships. Super powerful story. And we see life just flowing throughout it. So just curious, like off the cuff, what stood out to you guys yesterday? What spoke to you in the Word?
Well, I love origin stories, and I love context to things that I'm gonna get excited about. And I'm excited about Jesus, of course, because I'm a pastor. But more than that, it's kind of like the Marvel universe that has all these origin stories about characters and stuff. But it just makes you understand better what you believe and understand more about how you're to believe and the responses of those that believed in those similar to you, the way you believe. And so it's just so cool to go to Luke 1, right? And get kind of the context before everything really started happening. I mean, there was things happening before everything started happening. And so unbelievable context behind John the Baptist, who was the baby inside of Elizabeth. And then just the response of Mary. And some theologians believe she could have been 14, 15 years old.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, for her to respond in that way is supernatural. I mean, clearly. But that's kind of what stood out to me, what I dug into.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think about how scared she must have been. I mean, it's pretty mature of her to handle it the way that she did it at such a young age. And, you know, one of the things that you said is that she traveled probably pretty far for days to be in community with Elizabeth. And, you know, just to show how, I guess, mature she was with this information that she has been given. And, you know, I think some people probably think, what have I done? Why am I good enough to be carrying this child who is going to be the Messiah. So yeah, I just think about her in those moments when she's first finding out and what she does next.
We hear very little about her parents too.
Yeah.
You got to wonder how they raised her, right? And how influential they were on her to have responded that. I'm sure they were a part of why she responded the way she did.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about for sure. And with that trek and that desire to be in community, I think, one of the things I was kind of sensing this time around, because every year you're kind of going to the scriptures and looking for the fresh revelation, the fresh, bread. And I think for me, just the idea that Elizabeth, in fact, it said in verse 26 and 27 or 28 of chapter 1, had been hidden for 5 months. And then Mary's response is to go to her. And I just kind of find myself often wondering how many of us are in that space where, like you said, we maybe don't feel worthy of what we know God's doing or wants to do through us, and we're hiding. And there's something in Mary and Elizabeth coming together that just brings life, and it just begins to explode. And so, yeah, it's really an invitation, I think, for all of us to come out of hiding.
Yeah. Well, Mary literally pushed back darkness by visiting Elizabeth.
Yes.
Because that's what the enemy wants us to, he wants us to be hidden. He wants us to be secluded and in darkness. And by Mary just said, I'm going. And she went, and I just have this visual of just darkness going, whoo, and just how encouraging that had to have been for Elizabeth, right? I mean, as a woman, to have another woman come to you, Kristy, and be like, hey, I'm here. I'm supportive of you. I love you. And I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah. Especially being locked away for so long, and
with a husband who's on mute.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that part.
Elizabeth's husband Zachariah had been muted by God for 9 months,
which was hilarious how you said that. The service, by the way, the women were like, "Yay!"
Yeah, there's a little too much cheering in the room for that one. Right. But yeah, so they come together, and there's this moment where it says that John leaps inside of Elizabeth's stomach, and Scripture proclaims that. And so I leaned into that, and it's not easy sometimes for us to talk about this in our modern culture, but the reality is God is the author of life. He is the life giver, and Scripture teaches us that life begins in the womb. And I made the point that not only does life begin in the womb, physically, but spiritual life begins because of the empty tomb. And I sat in the moment with the womb for a minute, and just the idea that I've never seen a dead thing leap, right? Yeah. So if Luke, the physician, who's a doctor writing this, he knows his stuff.
Yeah,
says the baby leaped, then we have life,
right?
And so we leaned into Psalm 139, just one of many scriptures that speak of God intimately weaving us together in the womb. And I spoke to the fact that we as a church, along with many churches, are very solidly biblically pro-life. And at the same time recognizing that in that, statistically right now, the issue of abortion affects about 40% of women, and obviously men enter into that as well. And so it's affecting a lot of us, and we don't talk about it. And I mean, can you imagine if Elizabeth or Mary had gone down a path of aborting what God had been birthing in them? And so in all of that, we're sitting here prior to rolling the cameras, and Randy, you just kind of shared a little bit of how that's touched your life and your story. So, talk to us a little bit about some of that background, because I think that openness and transparency is something that's really going to speak to people. And our heart is really that wherever you're at in the journey, if you've been through that, God can heal.
Amen.
If you're in the middle of it, God wants to preserve life.
Yeah.
And for those of you walking with others, you need to be equipped. So
Yeah.
share a little bit what was on your heart.
Yeah, it was kind of a cathartic moment when you started sharing about, especially when you went to Psalm 139, because of an experience my wife Jamie and I walked through personally in our lives. But I do want to say first, before I share that, you could almost make the argument that life begins prior to being in the womb, because the verse in Psalm 139 says, I knew you before you were even woven in your mother's womb. So you could almost make the argument that, the train's left the station after the baby's in the womb, because God already sparked life. He already knew. God already knew you. He already knew you. So anyway, Jamie and I were in college dating, and made bad choices, and she got pregnant, and we were flipping out on many levels, mostly because I was traveling in a professional Christian gospel quartet at the time. Not a good look for that. And so we were struggling, and we were keeping it hidden because we were so ashamed.
Yeah.
The shame was overwhelming. And maybe if someone who's watching has ever walked through that or is walking through that now, that shame that I'm talking about. That anyone knows, if anyone finds out, you feel like your life is over. I mean, you feel like, oh, it's just so damning and so dark of a place. So we were still working through talking, trying to figure out what to do. In the meantime, the guys that I was traveling with in the quartet decided, it'd probably be a good idea for you to step away, and I did. I honored that. So we were sitting in church, in the church we attended in Anderson, Indiana, and the pastor at the time got through his message. He's a wonderful pastor, and he just kind of paused and then said, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but I feel like I need to say that if there's anyone in the room that has an unwanted pregnancy right now, or has gotten pregnant out of wedlock, or it's just a difficult situation and you've conceived and you're just struggling right now, don't abort that baby. Don't abort that baby. There's so many other things you can do right now. And he goes, I will come alongside and I will help you. And I look over at Jamie, my wife, and she's weeping because we knew the Spirit of God was telling that pastor that was for us. That was literally for us, and perhaps others in the room. I don't know. But we, after that, came underneath his counseling and his pastoral care, and he ended up marrying us. Jamie was a little over 4 months pregnant with our now 30-year-old son, Zachary, who is a worship pastor in Ohio and has 2 of our grandbabies. Shout out to Maddie and Emery. Woo, woo. But God redeems everything, can redeem everything. No matter how insidious you think your sin is or your wrongdoing is, our God can redeem it. And so that was our story. And so I was thinking about that when you were sharing, and I was like literally praying, oh Lord, somebody in the room, please, if they're in this place, don't fall deeper into that shame. Hear what he's saying right now. Hear what the Spirit is saying to you, and know that you can come out of this, and God can just do wonderful, amazing things in your life still. So,
I just I'm so thankful that you share that with all of us today, because it's what God can do, and I think often there's a saying I love, that what we reveal, God can heal.
Oh yeah.
And when we're willing to bring things into the light, and it ministers to us, but it also those stories help others.
Yeah.
And if any of you out there are, whether you're walking with somebody or it's yourself, I just want to encourage you. The church, we partner with CareNet Ministries locally on the Treasure Coast. They're phenomenal. They are there pre and during, trying to sort out, and I think even have resources for post-abortive. And then we also work with Light Step Ministries, another local partner that really walks closely with those that are beginning to come into the light. And we just encourage you. You know, God is not done. And also, in our family, we've got some stories as well, and have just seen what the Lord will do if we're not afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And so I think in this series, that's a lot of what we're really trying to emphasize is the idea that, these stories matter, these Christmas stories, but also your story. And I think, Kristy, as you and I have been processing things, there's things that you're recognizing in just sometimes we're more ready than we realize. So, talk to us a little bit about just this whole idea of telling our story.
Yeah, well, when we were talking about part of your sermon about how to be the light and to share the gospel, I was kind of thinking about a time, and sometimes it still happens, you don't feel bold enough or brave enough to talk about the Bible or theology or whatever that might be. But just, I was thinking about, like, what can I do, especially when I was a somewhat new Christian, is just being able to tell my story. That is the easiest thing to do, and to tell where you were before you accepted Christ, before you had a relationship, and where you are today. And we all have room to grow. So we're all continuing to grow in our relationship. And your story is evolving. But Brian had asked me recently about sharing my testimony on the podcast. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can tell my story one-on-one to anybody, but I kind of had a revelation, like, I don't want to do it on the podcast because I can't control who hears it, right? Yep. Like, I mean, and part of what I do, my job and my art, is being able to control editing and all that stuff, and so I thought about it. I was like, man, like, I love telling my story to people, over coffee or just, at the house or whatever, but doing it publicly is a whole lot different. But I don't want to have to control that, because I know that God, He's already prepared for who needs to hear my story, and who my story can relate to, and maybe change someone else's life. And so I don't have to be the one to control that. I know that. So I know I'll be telling my story eventually in 2025.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
There's freedom on the other side of that.
There is, yeah.
Kristy, there really is.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I did tell my story. Part of it. I mean, a very small part of my story. I told my testimony at one of the youth Wednesday night events. And I think probably the other thing I'm scared about is the emotions, because I was very emotional telling the story. And sometimes you just want to tell it without, getting emotional. I mean, it's just, it's the lay of the land, I guess.
Yeah. But I think what's so cool about what you're sharing is I think many of us can relate to that idea that there's still parts of us that we're holding on to and hiding.
Yeah.
That, because you asked me a question earlier before we turned cameras on of what does hiding look like?
Yeah.
And I think for some people it's not like this overt, like Elizabeth, where she literally is like in seclusion for 5 months. That may not be you, that may not be me, but there's parts of us that we're hiding, that we're not willing to put ourselves out there. And I shared in the message how I had a mentor challenge me that, hey, what I think you're portraying as this is a decade ago or so ago as humility. He goes, I think it's false humility. I think you're afraid to put yourself out there, and you're not stewarding what God has given you as well as you could. And boy, that hit hard. And so I think for all of us, like, realizing we're not in control, it's all God's. And if it's God's, how do I use it for
Yeah.
his glory. And he
Yeah.
shines through those things.
Yeah. Well, and that false humility thing, man. It's also, and this will be a more narrow people group who will kind of relate with this, but people who are on platforms,
Yeah.
or people who are in front of people a lot, or communicators, there's a magnifying glass, there's a spotlight on people who do that, and so. Let me be clear. I mean, make no mistake about it. And I don't even have to have conversations with you about this to know. We constantly are taking that to the Lord and saying, Lord, if there is any prideful way in me, please eradicate it. Please get rid of it. Help me to know how to move forward without having any kind of pride with that, because the last thing that you want to portray is this false humility, or this lack of submission to the Lord, and just and the understanding that He is the one who who everything that is good, and every blessing and every good thing comes from Him, not from us. We're just along for the ride,
Yeah, totally. I think for me, looking back, it was a pride that was masking itself because I couldn't even see the self-protection. It was pride that was self-protecting.
Right.
And I couldn't even really see it until somebody pointed it out. And I think that also is an illustration of why we do need life-giving community. We need to be in relationship with other believers that can speak into our lives. And, it's a big deal.
And we need to tune in too, because you showed that illustration of you in the doctor's office.
Oh my goodness.
And you didn't even see that, like that the sharks in the aquarium type thing in the ceiling. And because you were, we don't tune in, we don't focus in sometimes on the things we really need to see and hear. And that was another moment too in the message yesterday. Just for people who are just coasting through life, and maybe in their, you talked about that too, in social media or in their phones a lot. Man, we are real people. We're living in a reality, so don't get caught, don't get sucked into the digital world, and because you'll miss stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good segue. In the story in the scripture, what happens is Elizabeth prophesies over Mary and uses her spiritual gifts, and that's why we're so big on those around Pathway. Part of it is you own and share your story, but then you also begin to use your spiritual gifts, and it's another way to show the light. But the transition would be, then Mary has a chance to either worry or, as she does, worship. And you think about it, here's Elizabeth the elder saying these things over Mary's life, and you can imagine an angel Gabriel has spoken to her. Now Elizabeth is speaking over her, and she's got to be in a place of going, but what if Joseph doesn't respond well? What if the town gossips? What if I don't carry this for 9 months? Who am I? Am I worthy? And so I can just picture all these anxieties and worship, and she just turns to this amazing, from verse 46 to 56 in chapter 1. It's the Magnificat. It's this worship, and I think that was why I shared the illustration with my daughter. Is she helped me to look up and to see something I had been missing. And I think that's really where we kind of tried to land yesterday with this idea of, what are you missing? Are you worshiping or worrying more? And anything around that spoke to you guys? Our team had fun. They created I took 10 items out of her worship. They created a playlist, and we even have it on Spotify right now.
It was
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I'll definitely link that below, because I've been listening to it since.
Oh, sweet.
Since we got out of church yesterday. So I'll definitely link it below, because it's something that you'll want to check out if you're a music listener. Worship, if you use Spotify to worship, it's really good. You guys did a good job on that.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do together.
Yeah.
All the creatives got together in the break room. And
I saw that.
there was a lot of laughter. You came in.
I didn't know what you guys were doing. I just heard all the laughter, so I came out of my office down the hall, and it was fun watching you guys work on it.
Yeah.
But, it was interesting for me too. Spotify put out their 2024 wrap. And so. on Friday, I'm looking at my own, and this is not to put myself out there in a way that says, hey, look at me. But it was a moment where kind of two things happened. One was I looked at the year I had and went, that's how God has helped me get through it. Because we've been through a lot as a family this year. And at the beginning of the year, God took me through the story of Job in January, and blessed be your name. And it was just this idea that nothing is going to rob me of my worship. Yeah. He's good, even if nothing around me is good, right? Yeah. And so I'm in the 2% of Spotify users in 2024 globally. I listened to 78,000 minutes, which I had no idea. Yeah. Pray for me. That seems like a problem.
No, not at all.
But then when you saw my playlist, all the main things I was listening to, and I'm not a singer. I can't carry a tune. You know that well. It was worship. Yeah. And it just, I think, kept my head and heart when I wasn't with people, whether I was in my truck working out or in my office alone, just playing worship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think it's made a huge difference for me. The second thing it did is I am praying through if I need to reduce some of that this year to have a little more silence in my life. And so I'm beginning to pray through that right now. But yeah, I guess what I hope in that is it normalizes for everyone, especially men like me, that don't have the gifts you have with worship, but still could be worshipers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Completely. Joyful noise, man. Yeah. Joyful noise. And I had a prof when I was going through ordination in Bible school that talked one day. He was like, there's something for everyone where it draws them closer to the Lord than anything else. Yeah. And it might be that worship and worshiping him and worship music draws you closer to the Lord than any other way. You know, some people it's prayer, some people it's nature, some people it's, it's a variety of different things. Reading the word, and those all draw us into the Lord, make no mistake. But like, there's typically one thing that, man, we go, wow, I feel so close to the Lord when I'm doing that or experiencing that. And that might have been indicative of that for you. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It really, in a lot of ways, I think it invites even if it's the background and like the soundtrack to my life, it changes the atmosphere, changes the environment, and I think helps me to, and again, you go, well, like, you're a pastor, no, I'm a human first. Right. I'm a follower of Jesus, just like you. And I happen to have a role as a pastor. Yeah. So I think, just normalizing that for people.
It's almost a covering too. Yeah. It's almost like a guarding of your moments during your day. Because if that's going, man, it's a little harder, I would imagine. I think it's a lot harder for the enemy to kind of get in there and take us off track. Totally.
For me, it is. And it's not that I don't listen to other music. It's just, for me, this is what dominates my music. And I think it's the same idea, right? We each get to choose what dominates our life. What is the foundation? And I think it's so if you get a chance, check out the playlist and take a look even at the 10 items that Mary did. I mean, they're so powerful. Everything from God is Lord to God is generous to God sees me. I mean, she just kills it with this deep theology that you go, this is flowing from a 15-year-old. Right. Yeah. It's got to be the Spirit of God.
It's unreal.
So cool.
I was thinking that when I saw how many hours, because we did screenshots of our Spotify wrap up, that I should probably be getting some credit for some of those hours just because of where my office is in proximity to yours.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
I'm just joking. But yeah, I mean, I would not say that 78,000 hours is a lot, because imagine if we put a cap on how often we read the Bible, or how often we sit in prayer. I do understand the point that you're saying, that there is time for silence, and I definitely would not say that is a lot.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to, because I know someone's going to fact check my math.
Yeah.
And so in my head, had figured out, okay, how many hours a day are 78,000 minutes? I should have used the calculator before I did it on the fly yesterday. I said it's like 4.5 hours maybe as I'm preaching. It's actually 3.56.
Okay.
So there you go.
Still a lot.
All right.
It's around there.
It's really close.
Yeah,
It's really close.
And I think you're right, Kristy. If you think about that, to have worship playing 3.5 hours out of the day as you're doing other things, maybe it isn't as much as I thought, and maybe some of us, should consider that. We have 3-hour podcasts right now that are happening in our country that are some of the biggest podcasts. And even talk shows, radio talk shows and others. So what do we fill in our minds and hearts with?
That's right. That's
So,
it.
It's good. Well, we had talked about kind of finishing around the next step questions, and we don't always do this, but these were, I thought some tough questions that could help us.
Kristy can answer first. I'm just checking.
Well, I think what I'm going to do, we hit pretty hard on the worship one, so I'm going to there's 2 questions. One is, do you know the life giver, and are you life-giving? Right? That was one of them. The other is, are you hiding from community, from God, or from using your spiritual gifts? So, either one of those stand out to you guys as people might be wrestling with that, what to think about.
Yeah, I think I have someone in my life right now who's struggling with whether or not they know the life giver. And it just hit me right now in the moment, fighting emotion a little bit.
I see that.
But I think the enemy is so cunning and is so evil. He tries to get us off track, and because I know this person, I've known this person for decades, and they do know Jesus. They do know the life giver, and I think the enemy wants to convince us because of circumstances that happen in our life that somehow will make us believe, oh, maybe I don't. Well, don't let that happen either. I think the pendulum can swing both ways. I think it can swing over to where, oh, maybe I don't know the Lord or I haven't, which is a healthy thing to ask and figure out and make sure of. But then it can also swing to the other side too, where it's like you're certain of it, but you really don't. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you really have to, again, I believe it all comes back to seeking the Lord, seeking him out, surrendering and submitting to him daily, not just positionally, but progressively. Surrender to him daily. And he will give you that reassurance. He will give you that peace that you do know the life giver. And so I'm telling my friend who may or may not be watching, you do know him and he knows you. Yeah.
That's beautiful, man. I would just say for some of us, it may be that God is inviting you out of religion into a relationship to know the life giver.
Yes.
To know Jesus.
Yes.
For many of you that are listening, though, it may be that he's not revealing to you that you don't know the life giver, but that the life giver wants you to know him better.
Yeah.
That he wants you to get to know him.
That's good.
And then as you do, you'll find that he wants to make himself known through you, to make you life-giving to others. And you and I had some fun behind the scenes, just the idea of energy vampires. I've had my moments where I've been draining.
They used to be called EGRs.
Yeah, extra grace required. That's right. Oh, yeah, I know. You've been in ministry for a minute.
I think energy vampire is much better, though.
Yeah.
It's just it's so specific.
It is, and I think we see them, sometimes we can see ourselves being that, and then other times we see them around the workplace. We see them around the church. We see them around the neighborhoods. And so the hope would be that each of us as followers of Jesus, he is so life-giving. Mm-hmm. That we would become life-giving.
Yes.
And so I'm going to, anything on the hiding idea, whether it's with God, community, or spiritual gifts?
Yeah. So when I was listening to the sermon yesterday, my first thought was, where am I hiding? And I think just sitting down with you guys this morning, even before we started recording, what is it like? What does it look like for me, for Kristy, to be hiding? Because I'm here. I'm here
Awesome.
at Bible study. I work at a church. I'm here every Sunday, and we're worshiping. So where am I actually hiding, though? And what part of my life am I hiding? And I know before, like, sometimes it is hard to be in community, I think, especially when you'd rather be at home on your couch, like in your comfort zone. But when I went to Bible study this last season with the women's ministry, and the table that I got to sit at, and it was really random. I just had picked a table and said, "Hey, can I sit here?" And some of the friendships that I made, specifically one that I'm thinking about, just a new friendship that I'm hoping will be a new community for me. But at first I was like, am I going to have time for this? Am I going to have the emotional energy for this? But I'm really glad that I actually went and stuck through it, and just, if anything, making connections and new friendships with some of the girls that were at the table. That's the best part of it. So.
I think
awesome.
I want to respond to that,
Yeah.
if I could. So proud of you, first of all, because I know it's coming, and I know God's has big things for you and your story, Kristy. I do, because I've seen it. I've seen it happen to others, and I know your story.
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage you that way. But I want to say, I think we could replace the word hidden things with almost this word withholding. I think sometimes we withhold intentionally.
Yeah.
We withhold it for a variety of different reasons, many different reasons. But I can remember I was in an area ministerium with a bunch of pastors in Ohio when I was serving in Ohio. And it was just the area pastors got together once a month and just talked and prayed together and kind of had communed together. And I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I got nothing out of it. I hated it. I dreaded it. And my senior pastor was like, every pastor on staff's going, you're going. And so I'd go, begrudgingly I'd go, and I would just, for months, I'd just sit there and be like, and then I realized, because one of the pastors, one of the meetings, shared a heartbreaking story and was sobbing and weeping with what he's walking through, and it connected with something that I had walked through in my life. So it was like an aha moment, a light bulb went on, and God was like, yep, there it is. And I was able to share with him and connect with him at that level. And God was like, Randy, I had you go because you were going to give. You were going to give and pour out, not receive.
Right.
And you receive anyway. You know that. When we give, we receive anyway. But it was all about me going for that moment, and probably many others, to give back and to so you are influencing people that you don't even realize, Kristy. And there are going to be moments ahead where you're going to pour out, and there's going to be connectivity with you and others. You've probably already experienced this, but there's going to be more of that for you. I just know that.
Well, and I think as we're talking about life-giving community, back in the spring of this year, Cindy and I my wife Cindy and I were talking just about kind of what, after being here for about 3.5 years, what do we sense missing in our life? And one of the areas that we were both sensing was the idea of life-giving community. Like at a level, we had it, but not at the level we knew we really needed. And so we started a pathway group that meets a couple times a month, and out of that has started some pickleball weekly, and I'm actually sore today. I got my tail kicked last night. Didn't really want to go, but once I got there and got on the court and enjoyed, there was something life-giving about it.
Right.
And so, I think for everybody, hopefully this conversation today, what God is tapping you on the shoulder with, right? Whether it's, coming out of hiding or withholding with him, with community or with your gifts. we just want you to be encouraged today, to listen, to lean in, to do whatever that next step is that he's showing you, because he is a life giver and he wants to pour out his life in and through you. So we just thank you for being a part of this with us today. Thank you for these guys. You'll see them
Good
again.
job, Kristy.
Yeah,
It was great. And if you've listened, please do us a favor. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, share, all the things. And look for that Mary's playlist as well.
Yes.
We'll put that
in the comment section
Yeah.
or the description. Yes.
Yeah, the description.
And we'll see you again next week. Thank you.